Hey everybody, how are you doing? Welcome to Local Search at Scale Trials and Triumphs. My name is Ben Fisher. I'm your host, and today I have with me David Raymond. In this video series, basically, we are interviewing the hardworking heroes that work in the enterprise and the franchise businesses. And they're the ones who basically get the marketing going day in and day out. Me, myself, your host. I'm with Steady Demand. I'm the owner of Steady Demand. We're an 11-year-old local marketing agency, and one of the things that we focus on is working with wonderful franchises all over the United States and, well, in the world. And it's really, it's always interesting to see the innards and kind of how things work and what the positive things and sometimes the negative things are. And most businesses kind of don't get this and don't understand it. So today I want to say thank you to David Raymond. He is the franchise operations executive for Premium Service Brands, which there's quite a few brands, aren't there behind Premium, isn't there? About what, 16?
Well, there's nine active brands. I think we have a total of 12 or 13, but some were folded into existing brands. So our House Doctors brand is actually three handyman brands that were rolled up into one.
Right on, right on. Yeah, well, let's definitely talk a little bit about that. That sounds interesting from an organization standpoint. So, would you like you to tell us a little bit about yourself? And the fact is that nobody gets up in the morning and says, "I want to get into franchise marketing."
No.
So, how did you get started?
So I started my career in the trades way back in 2002. Joined a garage door company my cousin had founded. It was a very small business. I was the third person hired. Marketing back then was pretty straightforward, right? I think it was phone books, billboards, and direct mail, and it was like 80% phone books. And went through the entire, digital revolution as pay-per-click ads got launched and social media became popular. I can even remember our first marketing vendor for pay-per-click was the phone book. And they just included it with our phone book marketing. And I remember the first month they got us like 13 clicks, and we were high-fiving in the office like we thought, we'd made it. And in 2015, that business was substantial. We'd grown to about 6 million. I left that organization and kind of gone as far as I could with it, and ended up getting into franchising as an operations coach. And it was with a company called Hunks Hauling Junk and Moving.
Which
When
we've
you
never heard
launch,
of them before.
when you're a franchisor, you're launching pretty much novice business owners. If they have any kind of business experience, it tends to be corporate, large companies, enterprise level. And these businesses are intimate. They're very small. Sometimes you have maybe 2, 3 employees, and you're the everything. You're the marketing expert. You're the operations expert. You're the technology expert. And so, franchisors will hire people with experience in that to come in and teach the owners how to think and act and execute like business owners. Did that for 3 years with College Hunks. And then left them in 2018 with the intent to start my own garage door franchise. And was within about a year recruited to Premium Service Brands for the ProLift brand. Within a few months of leading that brand, I was offered the VP Operations role. This was in 2019. At that time, we had 3 brands. It was just 360 Painting, Made Right, and ProLift Garage Doors. Took the role, moved to Charlottesville. Fast forward to today, and there's 9 active brands, and we've done acquisitions and organic startups and everything in between. And that is how I ended up speaking with you, Ben. The interesting thing about being an ops executive in any business anymore, really, you can't help but touch marketing. I'm not a marketing expert. We have people, we have a chief marketing officer, and we have an entire marketing department. But, it's becoming so blended now where, ads have become so operational to the day-to-day, the integration between marketing platforms and operational platforms, and sometimes they're indistinguishable. We call them CRMs, but they're field service management platforms. They do dispatching, they do inventory management, they do payroll, right? But a component is they also do client relationship management. So,
Yeah.
and you can't. It's almost indistinguishable anymore, and so you end up knowing a lot more about marketing than you thought you needed to. And your marketing people tend to know a lot more about operations, and they should if you're doing it right.
I think you sold yourself short there. And here's why I say that is that I find that people like yourself who are involved, especially on the operations side, but even in just the working with the franchisees, the breadth of knowledge that you have to make those franchisees trust you is amazing. And I say this because we work with a lot of agencies and we work with a lot of people in the marketing space, right? And usually everybody has kind of a certain type of skill set, but it's very niched, right? So you've got pay-per-click experts, you got, paid media experts, social media experts, SEO experts, but then you got SEO experts, and that breaks down to a lot of different titles, right? But in your case, is like one of the things that really impressed me when I first met you was just your grasp on almost all those little pieces, and then being able to tie them together, and then of course being able to explain those to your franchisees. And then on top of that, being able to explain it not only to the franchisee, but to also understand their space as well. Because like you said, you came from moving and garage door. That's way different than something like HVAC.
Oh yeah,
Completely different. So I find that amazing. And so anyway, with that actually goes into the next question really well. And that is, how would you explain what you do?
I get asked that a lot. This should come as no surprise, being that I'm in operations. I'm not an extrovert. I'm not used to explaining how I do or what I do. I tend to tell people I'm the guy behind the curtain. Like, if everything's going well, you shouldn't know my name. The lights come on, the curtain goes up, everybody does their thing, and then the curtain falls on time. Everybody says it's a fantastic show, and they don't realize there was someone in the back that made everything happen. And I'm not saying I'm alone in being that person, but people like me tend to stay a little bit out of the spotlight. So,
Sure.
In franchising specifically, you're in a position where the pyramid of the hierarchy is kind of flipped upside down. Most people in a corporate structure, the number of people you have to convince is always getting smaller the higher you go, right? So when you stand in front of your direct report or your manager, you got to convince one person of your idea, and then that person goes to his or hers, all the way up. And then if you're staying in front of a group, it's still a small group, right? And the decision makers, the higher you go, there's just less of them. In franchising, it's inverted because the owners are ultimately, it's their business. Like they are ultimately going to do what you ask them to or not. And the things that you have at your disposal to compel behavior or action are kind of limited, and they should be. And you don't want to use those unless you absolutely have to, because they poison the relationship. You don't want to be the guy that shows up every day and points at the contract and says, "Hey, you got to do this because it says so on clause 15 on page 7."
Sure.
Like, yeah, you'll have a very adversarial relationship with your owners, and nothing will get done. So you spend a lot of time having to explain yourself. You have to stand in front of large groups, small groups, different groups, and repeat and respond to questions that come at you from all different directions. And if you do this over time long enough, you actually either do know what you're talking about, and the things that you say do turn out to be true, and the things that you promise to do get delivered, and that's where the trust comes from. Where you don't, and the trust goes away and you go away. But it's a very different experience, and it's kind of shocking for a lot of executives that cross over from corporate to franchising, is to get used to working the pyramid upside down, to where those of us at the highest, what people would say the highest levels of leadership within a franchisor, we're not making decisions that rain down on the franchisees. We're trying to figure out, okay, what things can we put in front of them that they can take advantage of that will make their business more successful, and then how do we convince them to do it, and then pushing that information one level up the pyramid to the next group, like the performance team members and the marketing team members, and then they push it up one level to the owners, and so on and so forth. So it's just a very different way decisions get made and how things get percolated out to the system. So in that sense, then you have to be, you never know when you get on a call and you're talking to, say, 200 owners, and somebody puts a question in the chat, right? You got to be able to answer it. Your credibility is at stake if you can. So And you go on a lot of those calls, you see how other executive answers, and you know them, and you know their pedigree and their background and how accurate they've been in the past, and it's just this, it's a positive feedback loop.
Interesting, interesting. And one question I think is that people would find fascinating is, what do you love about your job, and what do you hate about your job?
I think the thing I love the most about my job is the ability to influence and help people achieve success. In franchising specifically, these are people who have made a gigantic decision in their life. They have probably for the first time in their lives really just bet on themselves, right? The other people have bet on them in the past. Every time you get hired somewhere, that employer is placing a bet on you that whatever money they pay you is going to come back to them in dividends. And for most people that can afford a franchise, they've been successful at making those people right. They've made other people a lot of money. And this is the first time now that they're stepping out on their own and they're thinking, I'm going to place a bet on myself. And to be a part of that journey and to know that, you get to take a small bit of satisfaction away when they do achieve success and they find themselves financially independent is, I mean, I do the job for free. I mean, it's so rewarding. The thing I hate about my job the most is sometimes you get a disproportionate amount of the negativity. Things in business don't go well. None of us have complete information all the time. We're all making imperfect decisions in an imperfect world, and the goal is to beat the house and win more than you lose. And even when you win, sometimes people lose, and even when you lose, they lose bigger than you. And a lot of times when you don't get the decision perfect, or you do actually, but a couple of people get hurt because that's the natural outcome, that part's not fun. That part can be really tough to sit on a call and get kind of grilled over a decision you made, and you can't make excuses. You can't sit on the call and go, oh, well, the market changed and the Fed raised interest rates and, capital's tight and people are traveling and they're not improving their home anymore. Nobody wants to hear that, right? They want to hear, what are you going to do to fix it? How are you guys adjusting to it? What decisions are you guys making? Who makes these decisions? And so that can be a bit tough.
But the good thing is there, even with the love and the hate relationship with the job, everybody has love hate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that you're there for the good and you're there for the bad.
Yep.
So, because like you said, it's like the franchisee is making a metric ton decision and betting the farms in some cases,
Most of the time their whole retirement.
and believing in you and the system, right? They've been sold and they are sold and they're in it, and now their destiny is in their hands, but also their destiny is kind of in your hands too. Because you're there to basically, because we know most franchisees have almost no business experience when they get into it. Then they end up like owning like 16 units, right? And then selling.
And then you're the best. And they call you up and say, oh, I'm so glad. Like, best decision I ever made.
I just had one call me up this morning. He's like, yeah, we got out for 8X. I'm like, nice, congrats. So, and on that note, right, we talk about on this show that working with franchisees is basically like herding cats. So can you tell us a little bit about how it is actually to work with those cats? I mean, the franchisees.
Yeah, it's interesting and it's challenging. Again, these are very successful people, hands down. To be able to show up and to acquire even an accessible franchise. Trade-based franchises tend to be some of the more accessible ones. They're very low startup costs because you don't have to do a restaurant build out. You're not signing a 10-year lease. Most of your initial investment, if you have a vehicle-based brand, is going to be the vehicle, maybe your initial inventory, and funny enough, marketing. You're going to spend quite a bit on marketing. But if you were doing like a retail or restaurant concept, I mean, you might be $750,000 in before you even open the doors, right? So we tend to get a lot of people who have, since we're more accessible, we tend to get people who have, a lower amount of free cash. But the way to get compel behavior is, I guess herding cats is a great example. Like the more you try to push a cat to do something, the less it's going to want to do it, right? So you almost have to entice the cat like make it more comfortable over here, or make this a better decision. And so the way that you typically do it is twofold. One, you got to communicate a ton. You're trying to convince a bunch of very successful people that all their ideas are not as good as the one that the organization is pushing out. Because if you put 200 business owners in a room, there's going to be 199 better ways of doing something. And that's just the nature of it, because they're all problem solvers and they're all, ambitious and decisive. So they're going to have a way, and it's going to be a little bit different than yours. And in a societal type exercise like franchising, where it's safety in numbers, we'll have to the more of it we all do the same, the stronger we are as an organization. So so it's really just constantly communicating and helping them understand that why there might be 4 ways to do it. This is why we decided on this way. And then the second is, typically you get the top 25% of the system is going to be successful no matter what you do. They're just those kinds of people, and you tend to learn a lot from them. So if you watch them closely, you can learn what's working and what's not in the market. Maybe it's things that are escaping your vision. But they're also great at leading their peers, because they're kind of the example. Then the middle group takes some support and training. And so now you got to take the best practices and make them accessible and make them available, or accessible and consumable. So like that you take a hard, complex problem and you make it a little bit easier to metabolize. And then you got to give them repeated access to that in a number of different formats. Some people are kinesthetic learners. Some people need to hear it, see it. So you got to make sure all of those paths are available to them in abundance and constantly put in front of them. And then that group will move. They won't move as fast as the top 25%, but they'll move. And then the bottom 25%, they're never going to try it. They'll never do everything enough, or enough of everything to be successful. And you have to be very mindful of how much of your resources get pulled towards that group. And so ultimately what you're trying to do is make sure that the top 25% are supported, because they're kind of ahead of the problems and encountering things all for the first time, and that they feel like the franchisor is behind them and giving them the resources in kind of a very abstract way. We're not telling that group a lot, but we are supporting them and listening and making sure that the stuff we deploy works for them. The middle 50, we're just supporting through training and direct effort and just communication. And then the bottom 25, we just try to manage as best we can. If you can save a few and get them into the 50 group, the middle 50, that's what you do. But ultimately, you often wonder why they bought a franchise. Like, why are you fighting me on everything? You just,
I know. I've talked to a couple of those people myself.
Yeah, it's like, I just don't understand it. Like, you got on the train and then just wanted to get off in the worst possible way all day, every day. So, but usually most of your owners, again, this top 75% all understand that the strength in their investment comes from the overall health of the franchise system. And they really understand that. And they know sometimes that it might mean a little less local optimization for the benefit of having a national brand that has consistency and value.
That makes sense. One question I was thinking about as you're discussing this, right? Because I've run into all 3 of those segments, definitely, right? But you take a look at it, and so you've got your top segments, which we call those the Alpha Zs, right? Because the Alpha Zs are the ones that can actually get a message up to corporate. Right. And like you said, they can also kind of control messaging down to that 50% too, right? Because if it's working for them, they're going to tell them. They're going to have like a private Facebook group or whatever, that the Zora is not even involved in.
Correct.
And so they're going to share what they learn. But when you take a look at the top, the middle, and the bottom, do you kind of know the Z that you're working with based on the territory that they are going after? Meaning that if you have somebody who's going after, say, Orlando versus somebody who's going after XY zip code in South Carolina.
Right.
Not saying there's anything bad about South Carolina. It's a smaller market.
Yeah.
But would you find that newer, not so strong Zs go for that type of an experience? Or that type of territory?
No, for the most part in our brands, they tend to just go local. They want territory that's close to them. So wherever they live is typically where they'll target first. your empire builders, I mean, you do get them, that they come at you and they want to buy all the territory you have everywhere they can get it. They're going to grow these huge businesses, and they'll be a little bit more thoughtful about where they're putting a pin down. And they may target big metros. They may go the other way and do bedroom communities, but they'll typically be supporting their own strategy that they brought to you, not one that you've articulated or given to them.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
in
I would
our-
have looked at it in a. Just sorry,
Yeah.
I would have looked at it in a different way. I would have looked at it as, it's like, I like your system. It's predictable in how much cash I'm going to generate because of this. And if I follow your template, then yeah, I'm going to buy up everything I can and exit in 5 years. So that's interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I think like I said, we get people that come in that look like that are very they're intentional. And a lot of them will have already had significant franchise experience or business experience. So they kind of already know the game. They know what they're getting into. Overwhelmingly, and I don't know if you've seen the movie The Founder, but like the Ray Kroc story, and where he goes from where he first started out, he was selling his franchises to like these well-established, very wealthy business people, and they were terrible, right? They wouldn't follow the model. They were offering all kinds of weird stuff at the restaurant, and then it's when he started selling it to like middle-income young families, and knew that they would follow the model and they would stay on, and it really kind of set the foundation for what we see as franchising today. It's really not wealthy investors. I mean, it's not to say McDonald's is completely dominated by private equity now. I mean, you can't buy one restaurant, but like overwhelmingly, the vast body of franchisees are just, there's middle income families that decided to take out an SBA loan and start a business. And, they come at it from a very, very different mindset. And most of them are not looking to build an empire or to become incredibly wealthy. They want to have income independence, right? They're tired of being caught up in somebody else's decision making and knowing that, the division head made a bad decision and now 300 jobs are going to get lopped off, right? So that is terrifying. So they want income independence. They want more meaningful time with their family and their friends, which is something a small business can do for you, where you don't have to get it to a high level of success to be able to enjoy more time with your family. A lot of these businesses, you work from home or you're locally headquartered, right? That's why they pick territory that's near where they live. And so it's really not about overall wealth accumulation, although I do think that's a factor. I mean, people want to generate wealth. They want to grow a successful business and then someday maybe sell it. But what I've seen overwhelmingly in our candidates and the people that I've talked to that have looked at franchising is it's really just to kind of gain some income independence, higher quality of life, and a little bit more control over how and when they work.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, that's why people leave corporate America and start their own businesses in the first place, right? They don't want to work for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing.
Which seems to happen quite a bit, actually.
Exactly. So, all right, we're going to switch gears just a little bit. Okay. Let's talk about the politics of vendors. Or should I say the assault of vendors, right? Being that you're in operations, I'm sure that you get this more often than not. And that is either you get vendors emailing you out of the blue on LinkedIn. They track you down somehow. They get in touch with one of your Zs and they somehow convince them that they should ferry that vendor up to you because it's going to make such a difference in your life,
right,
and in the life of all of the franchisees. So talk to us a little bit about how do you deal with this, I guess is really what it comes down to. How does it not, A, destroy your day, and B, how do you know there's not a diamond in the rough out there?
That's tough. I will say anyone in my role, or even if you have a LinkedIn profile, you're going to get pounded just straight up every day, hundreds of requests. I'm pretty generous about accepting invites on LinkedIn. I think that network, the bigger you can make it, the better. You should always be open. You can't schedule calls with everybody who wants to talk to you about your marketing, and you can't take calls about everybody who wants to talk to you about products and all of that stuff, and they'll come at you hard and fast and quite often. Some of a lot of it has to do with how critical the vendor is to what we do. Some are hyper critical. Material vendors can be some of the most important vendors you have. The ultimate product that's being sold to the consumer. Marketing vendors also incredibly critical. Ben, I'm sure you've heard the horror stories. It doesn't take much to ruin somebody's business if you're not good at what you claim you're good at.
Right.
So those you tend to be very, very, very thoughtful and methodical. Like there's usually a long vetting process. You're not just going to hit up somebody on LinkedIn. Like I would typically expect to get a referral from someone within the industry for that role. So if I was considering a new vendor partner for, let's say, website hosting, that's not going to be somebody that hit me up on LinkedIn. That is literally going to be like me hitting the network. Who do you guys use? What do you like about them? What do you not like about them? Can I get a demo? Can you show me what's the correspondence like? How quick are they to turn around your requests? Does the website ever go down? And that process could take as long as 6 months to a year to determine who's going to be taking on that relationship. If it's less critical, an example might be bookkeeping services that we let the owners take advantage of. We'll try to keep 3 or 4 of those vendors on as vetted vendors that we've gone in and kind of work to make sure that they're at least minimally competent. And the owners have a variety, so they can choose the one they like to work with for whatever reason makes sense to them. Another example would be like outsourcing. A lot of administrative support. Those things we'll review multiple vendors and make them available. So I guess what it really comes down to is the more critical the vendor is to what the business is trying to do every day, the more scrutiny it will undergo. And, I don't want to discourage people from LinkedIn mining. I think you really ought to, especially if you're just starting out. Somebody's going to roll the dice on you. You got to get started somewhere.
Sure.
But large organizations are typically going to be very, very selective about who they allow to touch those things.
Yeah, and in my experience, right, in working with all the different franchises that we work with, we are usually introduced by somebody.
Mm-hmm.
We're working with maybe one of those Alpha Zs. They came to us with a very specific issue or a specific problem that they couldn't find anywhere else to get fixed. We were able to, fix it for them, and then they say, you know what, you really should talk to corporate. Mm-hmm. I was like, great, excellent, man. If you want to do an invite, please do. Yep. Do an introduction. And then usually the process, of course, slows down to a really, really nice halt at that point because you got red tape and all sorts of stuff that you got to go through to become an approved vendor, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Which includes a lot of those tests, basically, right. And it's like, yeah, if you screw up once,
well, and see,
screw up twice, bad.
But if you think about it from the franchisor's perspective, we're trying to figure out if that experience for that franchisee is common or an outlier.
Right.
Like you could have knocked it out of the park and did a fantastic job for them, and we wouldn't dispute that. You can put that information in front of us, and I've done that. I've looked at it and said, "This looks fantastic. This is great. You did a wonderful job, but this isn't going to be enough. Like can you do this now? If I give you 200 customers, can you do it 199 times?" Yeah. Well, I'm assuming you're going to screw up every now and again. Like nobody's perfect, but like I'm going to need to see that you have the internal capabilities to meet the demand that's about to come your way, that you can communicate well, and that we've had this conversation already. Active listening. Franchisees don't know what they're asking. They know what they're asking. But if you think quickly that you have their answer and you shoot an answer at them without really considering what's being asked, you get them in a lot of trouble. And so what I look for in successful vendors is, how much time on the call are they talking versus how much time on the call are they listening? Because when I do my job, it's 80-90% me quiet, just listening and making sure that I understand and then say back to the person, all right, so this is what I'm hearing you say. These are the things that I think you're telling me are an issue. And I've seen so many vendors get on calls where they feel like if there's a gap or if they let the other person talk for too long, they're going to lose the opportunity. And it's the opposite. You can get in a lot of trouble in franchising if you say something incorrect to a franchisee, and that hits the franchisee network. And all of a sudden I got 150 owners coming at me saying, so-and-so said this. And I'm like, okay, that's factually inaccurate. Well, that's what they said. Here's the recording. And sure enough, I go on the recording and I can hear what was said. And I'm like, okay, they did say that. But what they thought you asked them was this when you really asked them this. And now I have about 6 weeks of cleanup work ahead of me because I have to untangle, because I'm not going to get all 150 to hear it the same way they heard it on that call. So I have to get with them in groups and different settings. So a lot of the vetting process is just around, can I trust you with my owners? Are you going to be able to do the things that you say you did? You took care of that one franchisee, and I'm very happy that you did that. But I got to know that you can do it at scale and that you're not going to get me in a bunch of trouble 3 weeks from now.
Interesting. Very good point, though, actually. Really good point. It's like, no, you don't have enough that you have to do, right?
I've had some vendors cook themselves pretty good on calls where they just start getting, I call it diarrhea in the mouth. And it's like, I need you to stop. Just stop talking right now. Just be quiet. Ask for a different question. Tell them you're going to talk to somebody else and we'll call you back. But no, it's human nature. People try to be helpful, right? And that,
Sure.
they hear a question, they think they understand it and they know the answer. So they're super excited and they blurt out the response. And, if you watch, you'll see 3 or 4 of my executives roll their eyes because we just got 3 more weeks of work now because we have to unpack that one and wind it all the way back because that's not the right answer.
Do you have a good example? I'm curious, man. Now I want to hear one.
Yeah, somebody will say like, so there's various fees that franchisors have to charge. A lot of them are pass-through fees, so we can negotiate some pretty substantial discounts if we negotiate on behalf of the entire network. And so there are many cases where that's what we've done. We've gone to a group and we've negotiated a base price and said this is what the license covers, and we get on a call and go, we're introducing the vendor now, right? Everything's contracted, everything's inked, we're ready to go forward. This is the big reveal. They're introducing themselves to our owners. And one of the owners asks if the software can do X. And they say, yeah, it can do X, great. Except we didn't negotiate X. X was not part of the deal.
Oh.
So now I got to tell the 200 owners that you just got excited that your software can do something that we didn't pay for that, which makes me look bad now because now it's like, well, what am I paying for then? That was the one thing I wanted, right? And so, so now, I turn bright red on the call. 4 or 5 of my executives are bright red on the call. We can't, that's not the time to address it. You might clarify at the end and say, hey, he mentioned that but a lot of times it's really hard to put the genie back in the bottle once that gets out. So,
Oh, man. Wow.
so yeah,
Okay.
it's really paying attention to what is being asked. Yes, I know your software can do it. That's not what they're asking you. They're asking you is if they're using the software, can they do that? And the answer to that question is no. That is something we can do, but it's not included in this base rate. Because that
we
then
could do. We could talk to corporate about that later.
right. That is the perfect response because then I can go back to them at some point and say, hey, you guys all expressed interest in X. I went back and talked to them. They can add X, but it's going to change the fee to Y. Now everybody's on board. We're good to go, and that's the correct way. But yeah, you get that all the time, and a lot of times again, it's just somebody who is eager. They're super excited. They got their moment in the sun, and it's just they're not doing enough listening.
Well, you always have to respect the relationship, right? It's like there's this one Zord that we work with where they have an agency, which we're friends with too, that does their SEO work, right?
Right.
And so we had a Z come to us and say, well, hey, can you do our SEO work for us? And we're like, I don't think so. But why don't you check with, X over at the Zor and see what they say? Because secretly in the background, we were told that if this ever comes up, they need to go to the Zor and talk to them first. And so, but otherwise, obviously, if I had sidestepped that and said, sure, we can do it. Now, all of a sudden, I've pissed off a friendly vendor, which you don't want when you're working with a Zor, right? And now I've pissed off the Zor at the same time because now they've got to deal with calls about, well, how come we can work with them, but we can't work with them? What's going on here?
And I think that goes back to earlier. Like the hardest thing for a franchisor is to get all the owners kind of rowing in the same direction and really getting the boat moving. And it takes a lot of coordinated effort, a lot of communication, a lot of energy gets poured into. And if you're not inside of franchising, if you've never been a franchise executive, that might be lost on you. You think you're talking to the CEO, so you're going to get a decision and that's going to be the decision. And the reality is, no, that decision now has to be percolated all the way up the pyramid to the top where the actual decision makers sit, which are the, legit owners of the franchises. So you can actually make a lot of frustrated executives in franchising because you don't understand how the power structure actually works in a franchise. And so while the CEO approved it, okay, yeah, well, the CEO is not going to spend the next 6 months rolling this out. That's going to be me and 30 other executives. So yeah, you got what you wanted, But you've got now 30 pissed off executives that are going to remember this the next time your brand comes up and we're talking about vendor relationships.
So let's talk about this. So your average franchisee does not know anything about marketing, and they especially don't know anything about local search, right? The average franchisee. So how do you get your franchisees to actually act on local search when, for the most part, we're talking about a bunch of blue collar guys? They're out in the field. They're doing their work. They're watching over people, in trucks or whatever it is, or they're doing the work themselves. How can they even think about local search?
Data is king. The more that you can create, and the more if it tells a good story, that helps quite a bit. Most people are rational; they can be convinced. I mean, if you sit them down and you've got data and anecdotal evidence and the story makes sense, people will come around. A lot of business owners, and it's funny because I've worked with franchisees, but I've also come from small mom and pop businesses, and we didn't know anything about marketing either, right? But we listened when somebody came in and said, "Hey, here's the data," and when their performance matched the results that they promised, we were very happy, and that vendor had a very long relationship with us. I would say it's not as hard to get somebody. Trust is easy to earn. But when you lose it, it's almost impossible to get it back. So, I think you get a lot of goodwill from people when you're trying to get them to adopt a new idea or something, especially in an area that they're not comfortable or it's not an area of expertise for them. So if you were to go to some business owner, franchisee or other, just a regular local mom and pop, and said, "Here's the work I've done with 30 other people like you. Here's what the results are. Here's 5 of them you can talk to." You probably get that business owner to go along and say, "Okay, well, here, you can do it for the next 2 or 3 months and we'll see what happens." But when your results don't match what you promised, then they're going to come at you hard, and then they're going to go the other way. And then they won't believe a word you say to them until you do generate the results that you promised them. And typically what I found, by then you've already lost them. If you're trying to recover, so let's say you took on a new, and I'm going to speak to this as from the vendor perspective. If you took on a new account and you stood in all these intro calls and you made all these assertions and showed all these slides and data and you set a level of expectations up here, and 3 months later you're not anywhere near there, you'll lose the whole brand. They will fire you before I get around to doing it, and that ultimately, it would be harder if they all had marketing. If they were all CMOs and marketing directors, it would be a lot harder because they'd come at you with all their past experience and all the ways that they did it before. And that can be even harder than just dealing with somebody who doesn't know anything about it. So a person that doesn't know is just going to, for the most part, trust you. Interesting anecdote. When I went into the Marine Corps, I was a city kid. I never shot a gun in my life. I was never in the room with the gun like that. Closest thing I came to a gun was a water pistol. When I went to boot camp, went to the range, the primary marksmanship instructor stood in front of the class and had everybody raise their hand if they grew up on a farm and shot a gun, and all the kids did. And then they had all the guys that never had a gun. I raised my hand. He said, "This group's going to be all my rifle experts because they're just going to do exactly what I tell them, right? They're going to do the training the way they've been trained, and they're going to go out and they're going to shoot experts." He said, "Some of you country kids know how to shoot, and I won't teach anything, but a lot of you don't know how to shoot. You learn bad ways to shoot, and you're just going to carry all those bad habits onto the range. You won't listen to me, and you're going to either disqualify or shoot, marksman." Sure enough, I shot expert. It was the first time I'd ever shot a gun in my life. And that, to me, I'd almost take the blank slate than somebody who's got 10 years of marketing experience, because we're going to argue about everything.
Let's talk about how you deal with underfunded franchisees. We've talked a lot about trust and distrust.
Yep.
You've already got that nice little mixture of trust and distrust already coming from franchisees. But then you start dealing with the ones who are completely underfunded, but they know everything.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's the trust and distrust camp. So how do you, or can you, deal with it?
You can't help somebody who doesn't want to be helped. You just can't. If they're hell bent on doing it their way, and you just gotta let them go, it's gonna run its course. You hope at some point the pain gets so bad they start listening, but sometimes they don't, and they go the way they're gonna go. Somebody who's underfunded, but is willing. So we have we classify people who are willing and able, people who are unwilling and able, people who unwilling and unable. That's kind of how we look at it. Like, all right, well, this person is willing. Like they want to try. They made some bad choices. They ended up in a little bit of a hole. Maybe they had a bad season or lost out on a big job, whatever. But they're willing. What we typically do is we use marketing spend like it's like any other resource in the business. If it runs low, you got to come up with some other resources. So we go to the human element. They go ground pounding, grassroots, guerrilla marketing, yard signs, door hangers, knocking on doors, calling up realtors. The more you're underfunded, the more that activity has to go up. And can it be almost exponential at times where you're like, okay, you're going to work 30 hours this week and it's going to be on the streets. You need to find some work this week that'll get you through to next week. And what's interesting is none of the established businesses in your market act that way. It's always the new businesses that do the grand openings. It's always the new businesses that are handing out coupons at the supermarket. It's always the new businesses that are showing up at the schools to try to get parents to take their kids to pizza. Like, regardless of the industry, when you watch somebody start a business, the amount of intensity that goes into getting their business known about is staggering, and it works. And then they get lazy because they get a little bit of money coming in, and now they don't need that urgency's gone. The bear's a little bit off their back, right? So now they just I'll just do a Valpak, or they start throwing money at marketing, right? They just want to make the website better, make the phone ring more, kind of spend more on Google ads. Like I'm guilty of it. I did the same thing. I'm like, well, I can afford more marketing. I don't want to go beat the street this week. But when it gets tight and you need to, that's what we encourage our owners to do, is go out there and act like that brand new business owner. Nobody knows about you anyway, so you might as well pretend like you just opened. Go do a grand opening, go hang signs, go hand out coupons, pretend like today's your first day in business, get that customer to trust you, and then just go from there. So normally it's local intensity, just that guerrilla style, ground level, just go out and find customers kind of mindset. It's not permanent. Most people can't keep that going for very long, but it can get them out of a hole.
Yeah, I remember when I first started for one of my first computer companies way back in the days in the 90s. I started that by literally walking around about 5 miles from where I lived and just started handing out business cards.
Oh, yeah.
Going to the Chamber of Commerce, talking to the people at the newspaper and the radio station, saying hello, shaking hands, kissing babies. And it really, really worked. $50 investment, built a company. And actually ended up continuing it for a couple of years after launching, just to keep it going. Didn't need to, but it worked. So
Yep.
Why not?
It always works.
Yeah. So, and I guess it's also how you deal with inexperienced entrepreneurs at the same time. So you got your underfunded, inexperienced, right? That falls into kind of your Venn diagram you were discussing. And did you find that? Did you build any kind of programs with premium service brands to help that inexperienced entrepreneur basically say, well, Dave, I really don't know how to build this garage door company. What should I do?
Yeah. So our training program is 3 weeks long. It's 2 weeks of virtual, 1 week of live in-person training. You would think, well, it's a painting franchise, a garage door franchise, it's a plumbing franchise. So all we do is talk about painting, plumbing, and garage doors, and we don't. It's all marketing, staffing. It's how do you make the phone ring? Making the phone ring for a maid company is pretty similar to making the phone ring for a junk removal company.
Right on.
You got to know where your customers are. You got to know who your customer is. You got to know where they are. You know how to get in front of them. What are the different ways you can get in front of them? What are the costs associated with the various ways? And that's all baked into the model. And that's part of our approach. We also look at your business life cycle. So you have your first 90, which is the most critical. Getting out of the first 3 months is, you have to get through that with velocity and intent. And so it's really just about activity. We just go make things happen. And everything in the first 90 days is based on that philosophy. So you have a ramp-up coach that's unique to you during those 90 days. That's all that coach does, is work with new locations. The training program is built to propel you into that with velocity and intent. So that's kind of how we do it. And we are basically holding your hand right there with you for the first 3 to 6 months of your business. And what we're trying to do is we have a term we call revenue sustainability. It's kind of like break even, but it's not. Break even gives people the wrong idea. You tell somebody, well, get your business to break even. I've never had a business hit break even month after month. Break even businesses feel like this. I lost $6,000 last month. I made $5,000 this month. I'll lose 10 grand next month. I'll lose 3 grand the month after that, but then the next month I'll make 15. Like that's a break even business. Nobody should want to
Right.
leave that lifestyle. Revenue sustainability is the business is producing enough cash flow that it's not an immediate jeopardy of going under, right? It can sustain itself. It may not be profitable, you're not creating that lifestyle income, but we aren't worried about you running out of money, right? You have enough work coming in. It's matching so we don't use the term break even because it sets the wrong expectation. It's really just revenue sustainability. And then from there, you go into a different style of coaching, which is where we start talking about how to grow profit, how to scale the business, and how to make it meaningful and valuable. But that first 3 to 6 months is a sprint to revenue sustainability, just getting enough new customers and enough existing customers to sustain the business in the long term.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's just good business in general. Actually, really, it's good business practice, right? You never want to race to the bottom, and
No.
racing to break even is pretty much a race to the bottom. And
Yep.
you have one bad thing occur, and you are SOL.
Yep.
You know, and I know I've worked with those franchisees, and you know, suspensions, right?
Yep.
They happen in Google Business Profiles, and unfortunately, if you are at that break even type of model, you know, and you're not really don't have a good profit, and you're not saving money, right?
Yeah.
You're selling trucks within 2 weeks. You're firing people within 3 to 4 weeks. You know, those people that you wanted to hire and you fought really hard to get, guess what? They're gone. So it affects all aspects of your business.
100%.
And so let's talk about a little bit of a different side of the business real quick. And that is, so do you deal with, personally, franchise development versus brand marketing as well? Or do you
Yeah.
have somebody who does that for you?
We have a chief development officer. And we also have marketing resources that are dedicated to the development side of franchising. But you in operations, again, you touch everything.
Sure.
They still we use an enterprise platform that we manage for them. We understand where their leads come from, what networks they're working with, how leads are developed, and all of that stuff. Because even like today with our technology, we have artificial intelligence working to capture leads and follow up with missed appointments, and we've got integrations with other platforms that pull data in about where leads are coming from and how long they're in our system and things like that. So everything has become so, the technology and workflow process has become so blended. It's really hard to have these silos anymore where you have like, oh, well, chief development does everything in chief development. You know, if she's not smart enough to lean over and say, hey, I know this is a development technology, but this feels like an operational problem, then she's probably not going to be successful. So she leans over. She's like, can you help us out with this? Because we can't seem to figure out how to make this work. Or will you guys mind running this for us? Because, you know, it's a complicated system and you have an entire team of people who know how these things work.
Sure. Right on. Very cool. You know, and the last question really, and I think every business has to deal with this, but I think as a franchisor, you have probably a little bit more that you have to come when it comes to this. And that is the S word, scalability.
Mm-hmm.
You're only one person.
Yep.
You've only got one franchise development person. You probably have maybe a CMO, right? So, I mean, how big is your team, number one, I guess, really? And I think you have, how many franchisees do you have total?
So we currently have about 250
Okay.
active
All right.
owners.
So 250 active owners across, 13, 15 brands. How big is your team? And really, how do you deal with that from a scalable standpoint? Because it's one of the things that always impresses me is that it's kind of like a public relations person in the video game industry, right? They are so on tap, man. They don't lose anything. They have a perfect memory. It's amazing, right? It really is. They can remember something that you said to them 15 years ago. But what it really impresses me in the franchise space is that people at your level, even at the brand level, you have so many different owners, so many different personalities, so many different moving parts, so many problems, so many wins. How do you make it scalable and keep track of everything?
Obviously it's not easy. I'm sure you would have expected that answer. I think there's a couple of simple things, and they're not going to escape your audience. Like, you need to leverage technology as much as you can. the force multiplication that comes from having integrated technology and taking as much of the mundane and process-driven work out of your employees' workday is huge. And so, because you really want the people to do people stuff, you want them to create relationships, make decisions. And one of the things that always kind of astounded me about businesses is how much they confuse activity for productivity. If somebody's busy all day, every day, I mean, if they're busy, and we all have people in our staff that are just busy, you're going to run out of mental capacity pretty quick. And you're not going to make great decisions. You're still going to make good decisions because you're like a tired pro athlete. You're still going to play well. You're just not going to play as good as you could. And I think too many people confuse that. So they get real busy, and that busy is hard to scale. What you really want is people who have spare capacity in their day to take on unconventional problems, or have the emotional bandwidth to take on something that maybe is a little bit outside their job. And then that's where the technology comes in, because if it takes away the mundane stuff, you free more and more of their time up for this human type activity. The second thing to scaling is to shift your thought process away from linear growth, where in order for my business to get twice as big, I need twice as many people and twice as many systems. You really should be looking at, when I'm making decisions, especially at the highest levels, the C-suite level, what kind of multiplication does this decision allow for? So if I choose a vendor, what am I going to get back? Is it just that I get a better person to supply me parts, or do they take on maybe some of the training of the owners, or do they take on some of the logistical challenges because they have a supply chain that I don't? And I'll give you a great example. Sherwin-Williams is one of our key vendor partners for 360 painting. They're a fantastic partner, amazing. And they also have thousands of stores in the U.S. So their logistical footprint means they're never more than a few miles away from one of my owners.
That's awesome.
And they can get all the paint delivered right to the job site, or worst case, they got to swing by and pick it up. Like, that allows 360 painting to experience exponential growth, because I don't have to figure out a logistical footprint every time I put down a new owner. Are there other paint vendors that come at us from time to time? Sure. Does some of them offer better pricing? Maybe they're a better relationship, but until they can come at this brand with a better solution than what Sherwin provides. And so I think that's the other thing, is just you as a leader at the top of, or at the higher parts of the organization, you really have to start thinking about, like, what am I working on? What is it going to allow this organization to do? And does it provide for an exponential solution? Because if you just solve a binary problem, that should have been delegated down the food chain. So far, it's ridiculous. Like, if it's just like, do I go with A or B, and they're indistinguishable, why is that even on your desk, dude? Just go do that. But if I can say you swap out a piece of software and suddenly my workforce is 40% more productivity, and I'm using a really obvious example because they're never that obvious, but like, what you're looking for is this going to let me grow 3 or 4 times, 5 times over the next 2 or 3 years? Or is this something that just solves a little pain point today and gets me to tomorrow?
Right on, man. Well, cool. Hey, so that's all the time we have today. So thank you so much for your time today, David.
My pleasure, man.
Yeah, I mean, I love working together with you already, and this has just been amazing. I mean, the amount of information that you were able to share with everybody was just so killer, dude. How can people find you, number one?
Well, I mean, premium service brands. I'm going to probably hate myself for doing this, but there's a neat little hack. If you know my first initial and last name, you know my email address. It's Raymond at premiumservicebrands.com. And
we will pray for your inbox now.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's fine. I'm pretty good at hitting delete or forward, but but yeah, no, I'm not a particularly public guy. Like I said, I like to be behind a curtain. So, but I'm on LinkedIn, and yeah.
It's David Raymond 3, I think, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's 2 other David Raymonds before you. Okay, fine. And like David was saying, is, if you want to find out a little bit more about premium service brands, I would definitely encourage you to check it out. They've got some really killer brands and some cool stuff that they're doing. So premium. So anyway, go visit their websites, check it out. And that's it. So thank you everybody for coming by and watching the Local Search at Scale Trials and Triumphs, brought to you by Steady Demand and BrightLocal. If you're looking for anything that deals with franchising and local marketing, feel free to visit us at steadydemand.com, and also check out the tools that BrightLocal has to offer. We were talking a little bit earlier about stats and data and such. To make decisions, check out brightlocal.com. Everybody, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate you, and we will see you next time.